The silence stretched. It was thick with unspoken dread. My hand trembled as I brought my coffee cup to my lips. The warmth did little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. "It's a long story," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper, and one I haven't told in years. The memories were like shards of glass, sharp and painful. Talking about them felt like reopening old wounds. But something in the faces of the people around me, a mixture of curiosity and fear, urged me on. I knew I had to tell my story. It all started with a temp job, a way to make ends meet while I figured out what to do with my life. I never imagined it would lead me down a path so dark, so twisted, that it would haunt me for years to come. The woman at the temp agency, her smile as bright and artificial as the fluorescent lights overhead, had called it rewarding work, helping people in their darkest hour. And for a while, it was. The training was thorough, equipping us with the tools and techniques to navigate the complexities of human despair. We learned active listening, de-escalation tactics, and how to connect with someone teetering on the precipice of hopelessness. The early days were filled with a strange mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for the pain our callers were experiencing, hope that we could offer them a lifeline, a reason to choose life. I found myself looking forward to my shifts, to the feeling of empowerment that came from helping someone through their darkest moment. We were a team, united in our mission to be beacons of light in a world often shrouded in darkness. We shared stories, offered support, and celebrated small victories. For a brief, shining moment, I felt like I had found my calling. How naive I was. It was a Wednesday, the air thick with the promise of an approaching storm. The phone lines were quiet, the usual buzz of despair replaced by an unsettling stillness. And then the call came. My hand hovered over the blinking light, a strange premonition sending shivers down my spine. Brighter futures. "This is Sarah speaking." The voice on the other end was barely a whisper, childlike and filled with a terror that sent chills racing down my spine. "Hello?" I asked, my voice soft and reassuring. "Can you tell me your name?" "They're coming," the voice whispered back, the words thin and reedy. "They're coming to get me." My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to keep my voice calm, to glean any information that could help me locate the child. "Who's coming?" I asked, my hand instinctively reaching for the protocol sheet. "Where are you? The bad people," the child sobbed. "They're in the walls, and they're calling my name." The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, a cold dread creeping up my spine. The child's terror was palpable, the desperation in their voice echoing in the silence. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was no ordinary call. The team leader, a seasoned veteran named John, listened intently as I recounted the details of the call. His brow furrowed, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "Did you manage to get a name or location?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. "No," I admitted, my voice shaking. The child was too scared, too disoriented. But there was something about their voice, John, a chilling familiarity. John, ever the pragmatist, wasted no time. He contacted the phone company, pulling strings to trace the call. The address that came back sent a collective gasp through the room. An abandoned house, on the outskirts of town, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place steeped in local legend and shrouded in an eerie silence that spoke of unspeakable horrors. Even the bravest among us hesitated, but we were trained to help, to be the voice of reason in the face of fear. So we did what we had to do. We called the police. The police arrived, sirens wailing, breaking the unsettling silence that hung over the abandoned house. We waited, our anxiety growing with each passing moment, until a gruff officer emerged, shaking his head. "The house is empty," he reported, his face grim. "No sign of forced entry, no signs of a child, nothing but dust and cobwebs." Just when we thought it couldn't get any stranger, Jim, our resident history buff, spoke up. His voice was low, his eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and fear. "That house," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "It has a history, a dark history." He went on to tell us the story of Denise, a young woman who had lived in that house with her 2 children, a woman driven to the brink by an abusive husband, a woman who had reached out to the Brighter Futures hotline in her darkest hour. But help, it seemed, had arrived too late. Denise and her children disappeared without a trace, their fate a chilling mystery that haunted the town. The husband, a man with a violent temper and a history of mental instability, became the prime suspect. but with no bodies and no evidence, the case went cold. And the house, shrouded in tragedy and whispered rumors of restless spirits, stood silent. A chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-looking towns. Section 6. The haunting continues. Years passed. I left the Brighter Futures hotline, trying to put the experience and the memory of that chilling phone call behind me. But some things I learned have a way of staying with you. The nightmares started subtly at first. Fleeting images of the abandoned house, the sound of a child's laughter echoing through empty halls. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible, but always there. Whispering my name, mocking me, tormenting me. And then the calls began. It started with a wrong number, a child's voice asking for mommy. But something about the voice sent shivers down my spine. It was the same voice, filled with the same chilling terror that I had heard all those years ago on the hotline. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew the truth. The past, it seemed, was not done with me. The Brighter Futures hotline may have closed its doors, but the darkness that resided within those lines had followed me home. Section 7. Living in fear. My life became a waking nightmare. Every ring of the phone sent a jolt of fear through me. Every unfamiliar number filled me with dread. I was trapped, living in a perpetual state of anxiety, haunted by the echoes of the past. My friends, concerned by my increasingly erratic behavior, urged me to seek professional help. "You're letting your imagination run wild," they'd say, their voices laced with concern. "It's just a coincidence. These things happen." But how could I explain the unexplainable? How could I articulate the bone-chilling fear that gripped me every time I heard a child's voice, every time I saw an abandoned building? I was a prisoner in my own mind, haunted by memories I couldn't escape. The Brighter Futures hotline had promised a glimmer of hope, a chance to make a difference. Instead, it had plunged me into a darkness from which I feared I might never emerge. Section 8. Seeking answers. Desperate for answers, I found myself drawn back to the town where it all began. The abandoned house stood at the end of the overgrown driveway, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world. It hadn't changed much. The paint was just as peeling, the air just as thick with a sense of oppressive sadness. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest, listening to the silence. A silence broken only by the creaking of the house and the whisper of the wind through the trees. I needed answers. I needed to know why this was happening to me. Why, after all these years, was I still being haunted by the ghosts of the Brighter Futures hotline? Was it guilt? Was it something more sinister? Something that defied rational explanation? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't run anymore. I had to face my fears, to confront the darkness that had taken root in my soul. Section 9. The Unresolved Mystery. Years later, I still think about that house, about the child's voice, about the darkness that clung to the Brighter Futures hotline like a shroud. The calls have stopped, but the fear lingers, a constant reminder of the horrors I faced. Some nights when the wind howls and the shadows seem to dance, I hear the whispers again. My name, echoing through the darkness, a chilling reminder that some wounds never truly heal. The mystery of the Brighter Futures hotline remains unsolved. The police never found Denise and her children. The abandoned house still stands, a silent testament to the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. And I am left with the chilling knowledge that some stories don't have endings, only unsettling chapters that continue to haunt us long after the final page has been turned.
My father is a hazy figure in the dusty attic of my childhood. I remember the rumble of his laughter, the way the floorboards creaked under his weight. He smelled of sawdust and peppermint. I have a fleeting image of him tossing me in the air, my tiny hands reaching for his. Then, silence. He was gone. My mother said work had taken him overseas. It was a vague explanation. I was young, but something felt off. Years passed. My father existed only in faded photographs and whispered stories. My mother maintained the same story, her voice tight, her eyes avoiding mine. My father was working hard, sending money, thinking of us always, or so she said. The doubt lingered, a seed of unease that blossomed with each passing year. I was 20 when the truth unraveled, a tangled knot of the bizarre and the heartbreaking. My mother, her face etched with years of guilt and sorrow, finally confessed. My father hadn't abandoned us. He wasn't working overseas. He was living as a hippopotamus in a Chinese zoo. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. My father, a hippopotamus? It sounded like a cruel joke, a figment of a fever dream. But my mother's tears, the pain in her eyes, spoke of a truth too painful to invent. She explained that my father, battling obesity his entire life, had been offered a unique opportunity. A Chinese zoo sought a human hippopotamus, a bizarre tourist attraction. Desperate, he accepted. Obesity had always been my father's nemesis, a constant shadow that darkened his life. From a young age he carried more than his fair share of weight. Food was his comfort, his solace, but also his jailer. He tried every diet, every exercise regime, but the pounds stubbornly clung to him. It affected everything: his health, his self-esteem, his ability to simply exist in a world not built for a man of his size. He was a prisoner in his own body, ostracized and ridiculed. Doctors warned him, his weight a ticking time bomb. But even their dire pronouncements paled in comparison to the whispers, the stares, the cruel laughter that followed him like a curse. The offer arrived in a plain brown envelope, an air of surrealism clinging to the typed words. A Chinese zoo, seeking to capitalize on the public's fascination with the unusual, proposed a peculiar job to live as one of their hippopotamuses. They promised a hefty sum, enough to secure our family's future. It was an absurd proposition, demeaning, ludicrous, yet strangely tempting. The money would solve everything, lift the weight of financial burden that had become a constant source of worry for my father. He saw it as a chance to disappear, to shed his human skin and become something else entirely. Section 5, Metamorphosis, the transformation into a hippopotamus. The transformation was gradual, a slow descent into the surreal. My father, bound by a confidentiality agreement, could reveal nothing. We watched, confused and concerned, as he began to spend hours in the bathtub, his skin softening in the water. His diet shifted, consisting solely of grass and leaves, delivered in unmarked trucks. Then came the prosthetics, the bulky padding that mimicked the form of a hippopotamus. He moved with increasing difficulty, his once booming laughter reduced to muffled grunts. He withdrew into himself, his eyes holding a mixture of fear and strange acceptance. He was becoming something else, something not quite human. Section 6. Days of a hippopotamus dad's life in the enclosure. The day he left is seared into my memory. They came for him in the dead of night, a black van with tinted windows. He hugged me goodbye, his bulk stiff and unfamiliar, the scent of wet grass clinging to his skin. That was the last time I saw him as a man. Later, my mother showed me pictures. My father, or rather, the creature he had become, wallowing in a muddy enclosure surrounded by real hippopotamuses. He seemed strangely content, a part of the landscape. He ate, slept, and existed among them. He became a spectacle, a source of amusement and wonder. And I, his son, could only watch from afar, a silent observer to my father's bizarre reality. Section 7. A tragic farewell, the hippopotamus's demise. The news of his death came 13 years later. A brief, impersonal message from the zoo, their hippopotamus, no mention of my father, had died. They had found him at the bottom of his pool, the prosthetic skin ripped, revealing the man beneath. An accident, they said. There was no funeral, no body to bury. He was cremated, his ashes scattered in the Yangtze River, indistinguishable from the dust and silt that flowed beneath the Chinese sun. My father, the man who loved peppermint and sawdust, who once tossed me in the air, was gone, lost in the very act of trying to secure our future. Section 8. The Weight of Truth. A Son's Burden and Understanding. The truth, when it finally came, was both a revelation and a burden. The outlandish tale I had initially dismissed as a cruel joke became a harsh reality. My father, the man who had disappeared from my life, had chosen a path so bizarre, so heartbreaking that it defied comprehension. Yet as the initial shock subsided, a strange understanding began to dawn. My father, trapped in a body that brought him nothing but pain and ridicule, had sought escape. He had become a spectacle, a caricature, but in doing so, he had found a strange kind of peace. He had lived amongst creatures who did not judge him, who accepted him for what he was. Section 9. Finding pride in the unusual, a legacy remembered. My father's story is not one of heroism or grand achievement. It is a story of desperation, of a man pushed to the very edge of human experience. He made an unconventional choice, one that cost him his life. But in his sacrifice, in his willingness to become something other, he secured our future, and for that, I am grateful. I choose to remember him not as the man in the hippopotamus suit, but as the man he was before, a man who loved his family fiercely enough to disappear for them. His story is a reminder that life is full of surprises, of unexpected turns that can lead us down paths both strange and wonderful. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the lengths we will go to for those we love.